Hey everybody. This screencast is going to talk about a common issue that comes up when you're working with floats. So, as I've talked about, you can use the float property to basically, the examples would be if you wanted to have an image and have text wrap around the image, you can use the float property for that. You can also use the float property to basically create layouts. So to get one element to sit next to another element. But when working with floats, so what I'm going to do here is, so I used this example already in the other lecture about floats. So I have a container element, the red box, and I have two boxes inside of that, the white box and the black box. So I'm going to go over to my code here and use the float property to float them, to get them to float or sit next to each other. So the issue though, potential issue, is when you work with floats, what can happen, as we can see here, is that as soon as you apply the float property to some elements, so they are now sitting next to each other, which is exactly what we want them to do, but as soon as you do that, what sometimes happens is the container element, so the red box, the parent element, can collapse. So whenever you have this collapsing container issue, it's most likely due to the fact that the container has floated elements inside of it. So it automatically collapses as a result. There are a few ways we can deal with this. I'm going to cover two of them, and I actually have a link in this demo, which I'll have linked from the YouTube video. There's a link in here that I think has a third way of dealing with it too, but I'm going to go over my two primary approaches to fixing this collapsed container issue. Okay, the first approach is using the overflow property. So I did mention this already. So basically what you're going to do is, again, what we have here is a container element with floated elements inside of it. So red box is the container or the parent element. White and black box are the child elements, or they are contained inside of the parent, and they have been floated. So if we look at the code, this div with the wrapper class, that's my parent element or the container element, and then these two divs or boxes are inside. They have been floated, which has then caused the parent element to collapse. First approach is I simply target that parent. So that's going to be this wrapper div. So this is the parent element. I've given it a class called wrapper. So you target that parent element and you use the overflow property, set it to auto. Easy as that. So now you can see my container element is no longer collapsed. The full background of it, the red, is now fully containing everything inside of it, plus it has the padding that I've applied to it. So that's the first way to fix the collapsed container issue when dealing with floats. The second way, I'm going to get rid of that overflow, is to clear the floats. So we do that using the clear property. So floats objects, or sort of makes an object sit next to another object. Clear typically goes along with float. Clear basically says remove the float, clear the float from the rest of the document. So what I can do here is add a new element and apply clear to it, which basically, so I want this to float and I want this to float, so I'm not going to touch those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a third, basically empty div in here. I'm going to give it a class called clear. Remember, the name I'm giving it here, clear, is totally arbitrary. I'm just naming it clear because it is helpful for me to remember what its function is. And then I'm going to go define that class up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the clear property, and the value I'm going to give it is both. Clear has, I think, 4 properties: right, left, both, or none, I think is the 4th. I'm basically telling it to clear any right floats or left floats that have been applied prior to this point. So still within that container, I have my first box that's been floated, my second box that's been floated, and now to fix that collapsed container, the collapsed container, remember again, is caused by the fact that there are floated elements, and in this case only floated elements. So I'm going to add a third element, remove the float, the previous floats, because they just inherit, specifically remove it using clear, and now my container element is no longer collapsed. So again, 2 approaches. First one is target the parent and use overflow, or set overflow to auto on the parent. Second approach is to add another div, or maybe you already have another div naturally in the flow of your document. If not, you can add a div, basically leave it empty, because I'm not using it for any content. I'm just putting it in there to specifically attach the clear property to it. So add a div. In this case, I'm giving it a class. The class has the clear property set to both. So if there were any right floats or left floats, I'm clearing all of them, which automatically helps that parent element to uncollapse, essentially. So that's it. Main thing here is just, when working with floats, there's this common issue where a parent container can collapse as soon as that happens, and you may not notice it. So we may not have noticed the collapsing if I didn't have that red background. As soon as you start adding content below it, though, you'll probably notice the fact that it's been collapsed. So it's generally good practice to, if you have a container element that has nested or children elements in it that are floated, target the parent and set overflow to auto, or just make sure that after those floated elements, if you don't want the floating to continue, you clear those floats using the clear property. Yeah, so that's about it. So that's working with floats and how to deal with the collapsed container issue. Again, I'm going to link to this, or this article is linked in here, and this page here, this demo page, is going to be linked from the YouTube video as well. Okay, that's it. Thanks.